Of the myriad off flavors that can be in beer, there are a few that it seems eager evaluators and competition judges are most wont to identify, one of which is characterized by flavors of cooked vegetables, namely canned corn. This is the Brewlosophy Podcast. I'm your host, Marshall Schott, and this episode, contributor Malcolm Frazer is with me to talk about the strongly avoided dimethyl sulfide.
Yeah, as far as all flavors go, DMS, dimethyl sulfide, is it's kind of funny because like a lot of the off flavors, they're present in beer, right? And it just becomes how much of it, and if it's too much, and,
yeah.
and if you want it there, right? So anytime you ferment using malt, especially, say barley, but malted barley, you're going to have some DMS, just like you have a little bit of diacetyl and a little acetaldehyde.
Yeah.
So it's there. Now, whether or not it's to a point where you can detect it, that's the issue.
Well, and my understanding is that DMS isn't terribly easy to measure in a lab either. There's a lot of it takes a lot of tweaking, and it's a really sensitive lab equipment to actually detect whether dimethyl sulfide is in beer.
Yeah, well, I don't, we're not going to go over the SOP, and talk about that here, but yeah, it's a very, like, basically, you go through and you have to calibrate your equipment just like any test, but you have to go through a laborious process to make sure that you can measure it, and then make sure that you're accurate measuring it, and then et cetera. So, but I mean, you can actually measure it. So when people say, "Oh, I think it's DMS," if it's a very large brewer and they say we had 35 micrograms per liter or 35 ppm, then they had it. They're not guessing. They measured it. So
the interesting thing to me, and we'll get into my opinions about this stuff later on in the show, but as sensitive as this equipment needs to be to detect DMS, all of us homebrewers and craft beer lovers out here think that our palates are sensitive enough to pick it up. But based on how frequently this off flavor comes up, I remember thinking years ago that it was really easy to produce and fairly common in homebrewed beer. I was one of these people who thought I could detect it. My thoughts obviously have changed over the years based largely on some of the experiments that we've done, which we will be getting into later in the show. Speaking of experiments, I know we're not the only ones out there who are interested in the more sciencey side of brewing and beer. If you are like us, then you really should consider joining the Brew Club, which is a totally free club. It offers members all sorts of cool opportunities, one of which is having your own experiment published over at brewlosophy.com. Pretty cool deal. Additionally, members of the Brew Club who tag photos of their brew day on social media with hashtag brewabeer, that's BRU a beer, or hashtag Brewlosophy, are not only entered into a drawing to have their photo featured in the Hot Beat, our regular monthly newsletter, but they'll also receive some nifty Brewlosophy stickers in the mail. Learn more about becoming a member at thebrewclub.com. That's the BRUclub.com. And make sure to subscribe to the Hot Beat using the form in the sidebar over at Brewlosophy.com. Lots of cool stuff there. Thanks so much to everybody who's been using our links to do their online shopping. It's a huge part of what allows us to keep producing this show. If you like what we're doing and you want more of it, please consider heading to brewlosophy.com/support and using the links you find there when you do your online shopping. You can bookmark those links too to make it even easier for you. We also offer rewards for your support. Head over to patreon.com/brewlosophy to learn how you can get rad things like unique discounts at YakimaValleyHops.com, a chance to win a $50 Love to Brew gift certificate, and an invitation to a monthly live Q&A with a special guest just for pledging as little as $1 a month. Our guest for the next month is Mecca Grade Estate Malt Seth Klon. Really cool dude who knows his malt. He's going to be answering questions from patrons about all of their malt brewing and otherwise needs. It's going to be a good one. The list of upcoming guests includes Russian River's Vinny Chilurzo and Dr. Charlie Bamforth from the UC Davis Brewing Program. All of that just for helping us out a little bit. Learn more about becoming a patron over at patreon.com/brewlosophy. All right, well, I got an apology to make. And Malcolm, I'm glad you're on the show today because I've been telling people that you were going to be going to Beer and Sweat in Cincinnati. And unfortunately, you weren't able to make it this year.
Yeah, just some work and family commitments kind of coincided. And I talked to the organizers, and they are, of course, awesome as always, just saying, hey, we wish you were here. And I'm going to make it a goal to go again next year. This is the first year I've missed it in quite a while. So, it just didn't work out. But But we have something else to do instead. So
hell
let's
yeah,
talk
dude.
about that.
Fresh Hop Ale Festival. Malcolm is going to be joining us up there, which I'm super stoked for. So you'll be with Brian, me, the dudes from Yakima Valley Hops, bouncing around Yakima during hop harvest and hitting up the Fresh Hop Ale Festival on September 29th. That's going to be a blast. And then coming up in March of 2019, Denny Kahn and I are going to be leading a couple seminars on experimentation in brewing for the Brew Your Own Boot Camp in Asheville, North Carolina. Tickets go fast for this event, so make sure to secure yours as soon as possible if you plan to attend. All right, if you haven't already, please consider leaving a rating and a review of this show wherever it is you listen to podcasts. It doesn't take long, and it seriously helps people who might not know about us to find the show, which is always good. Feedback. We've got some feedback this week. It's brought to you by Brewers Hardware, who specialize in tri-clover compatible sanitary fittings, conical fermenters, kettles, and brew stands. Brewers Hardware offers a variety of unique and hard-to-find items for both the home and craft brewing markets, including high-quality stainless fittings at competitive prices and very fast shipping. If you're into electric brewing, you've got to check out the BCS 482 control system, which provides everything needed to fully automate your brewery. Learn more at brewershardware.com, and don't forget to mention Brewlosophy when you check out to receive a free gift. That's brewershardware.com. Okay, David Johns from Caldecott, Wales in the United Kingdom wrote in to say, in episode 43 on astringency, you mentioned that sparge water over 170 degrees Fahrenheit, which is 77 degrees Celsius, may lead to tannin extraction, and a fact, he quotes, that seems to be ingrained in homebrew lore. However, on one of the many homebrew podcasts I listen to, I recall John Palmer stating that tannin extraction is a function of pH, not temperature. Following this, I batch sparged several brews, mostly pale ales of some variety, with water just off the boil. I manage my water chemistry using brew and water. And boil all my water for 20 minutes before use to drive off chlorine and reduce temporary hardness. In addition to salts, I use lactic acid to target pH for mash and sparge water to ensure the mash and lauter remain within the 5.2 to 5.6 range. Although I don't have a pH meter to confirm the exact pH achieved, the finished beers had no noticeable astringency, and the bitterness and mouthfeel were spot on. Additionally, if a few grains in the boil can lead to tannin extraction to the point that a whole batch of beer has detectable levels of tannins, I love this question, Malcolm, then why is decoction mashing, especially the coveted triple decoction, not producing beer so tannic that it sucks your face inside out? I currently have a Vienna lager on tap that I single decocted, boiling the decoction, wort, grains, husks, and all, for 15 minutes before returning to the mash tun. And there is no astringency of any kind that I can detect. What say you, Malcolm?
Well, yeah, I love that example of decoction mashing because, if your pH is controlled, you can boil the living piss out of it. And then you can, so there's also an element to the lagering process because the tannins can drop out then if you did extract some. So yeah, I mean, like almost anything in nature, and we might even touch on it here with DMS, most of these bioreactions and even some chemical reactions, so it doesn't have to be a biological reaction, they're dependent on both temperature and pH.
Yeah.
But everyone always mentions temperature because they understand it better than pH. pH will affect the reaction rate and the reaction total of a lot of things, just to say it generically. So we know that decoction affects the enzymes in our mash, right? And similarly, it affects the solubility of tannins into our wort and then result in beer. So yeah, temperature alone is not the determining factor. Temperature has higher energy, right? If something is hotter, it has more energy into it because we put energy in it to increase the rate at which these atoms are moving around. That's temperature.
Right.
So higher temperature is better at extracting tannins from the grain.
Yeah.
Whether or not they stay in solution is in part determined by the pH.
So we've done shows on our pH, our mash pH experiments. Jake did one where he super low mash pH. I did the one where it was a really high mash pH, and it seems to me very, very difficult to intentionally extract tannins from grain husks and to make an astringent beer that's not contaminated at the very least. One thing we haven't looked at, and something I'm certainly interested to do, is the kind of the combined effect of temperature and pH, because in the mash pH experiments that we've done our temperatures were, within normal limits. They were where you would typically keep them. So it's something that we definitely want to look into. I appreciate the feedback, David. That was good stuff. If you have show feedback, you can send it to feedback@brewlosophy.com, or you can leave us a message by calling 951-444-0320. One of the many awesome things about homebrewing is that it allows us to try some pretty weird things without much risk, right? We're just brewing 5-gallon batches, sometimes less than that, which is exactly what listener Chris Sprague did with a beer he recently sent to me. Looking to produce something extremely low in alcohol, but not lacking body, he designed a recipe using nearly 45% carapils, along with about 30% caramel malts, 15% rye malt, and 10% Munich malt.
1 minute beer review with Jersey and Tim.
Darker but not stout.
We don't even have to taste it at this point.
We're learned men.
All right, let me see.
Don't even smell it. We're better than that.
Don't smell it?
This is I mean, it could be anything.
It's got no smell.
I don't believe that for a second.
Sniff it.
It's got no smell. It's down to taste, Timmy.
Here it goes.
And?
Not good.
Okay. We got some play here. Now, you're done. You take a back seat. I'm waiting.
I'm waiting.
Wait for old jurors to roll in. How do you not like that? There's no taste. What taste don't you like? There is no flavor or taste to that.
That's what I don't like.
It's a ghost beer. Like someone built this beer without the proper ingredients. It's a ghost beer.
I'm going to taste it again. Hold on.
Yeah, well, I bet you change your opinion.
No, I still there's nothing there.
Your first opinion was, that's pretty good.
No, I did not say it was good. I said I don't like it.
Back up the tape. It's down to taste, Timmy.
Here it goes.
And?
Not good.
You know what? I'll let you off the hook here, Timmy.
It doesn't. Nothing for me.
Maybe we're like biased by the fact that it's darker.
It looks good.
It's
It does
darker.
look
Like
good.
when I hold up the light, it's very dark. Not stout dark, but kind of IPA dark, right? Like a darker IPA. Like I expect a lot of flavor out of this color.
Yeah.
As learned men, and I get nothing.
Nothing.
Having known about this beer prior to drinking it, I fully expected it to be syrupy, rich, and quite honestly, disgusting, just the way it sounded. Surprisingly, it wasn't really any of these. In fact, sort of like Jersey and Tim, I found both the aroma and flavor just to be kind of lacking. It was almost like smelling and tasting water that had a little bit of like an amber ale blended into it. Was it fantastic? I certainly won't be making a beer like this anytime soon, but it definitely was more drinkable, I guess, than I thought it would be based on the recipe. Malcolm, you've probably never brewed a beer that was 75% crystal malts.
I mean, it's fun to screw around with silly recipes, but I'm surprised it didn't taste more like all those character malts, because carrot pills are supposed to have like that light, sweet honey taste or whatever.
Yeah.
So you think it would have at least been sweet. I mean, I know that gets fermented away, but whatever. It's kind of neat.
Yeah. I mean, Chris was having fun. I get that. And, I think a common thing right now in homebrewing is trying to produce really, really drinkable beers that aren't high in alcohol, but still have all the flavor of a good craft beer. I'm not sure this is the route to getting there, but Chris said he enjoyed it, and I guess that's, if it works for you, then do it. He said that it was about 32 IBU. One thing that I wrote down in my notes was that it did have kind of a sharp bitterness, which I wonder, at 32 IBU, I wouldn't really expect it to be as sharp as I perceived it to be. But, that could just be a mix of not having, that kind of backbone, that malt backbone that I expect in a beer like that. But still, it was a lot of fun to taste. And I always appreciate people sending their beers in. If you have a beer or any other alcoholic beverage that you would like reviewed by Jersey and Tim, you can email me, Marshall@brewlosophy.com, and we will get you all set up. All right, we'll be back right after these brief messages.
Hi, I'm Stephen Leach, creator of Brow Supply Brewing Systems, here to tell you about our latest Unibrow brewing system. Modeled after the brew in a bag method, the Unibrow uses the same kettle for both mashing and boiling, replacing the fabric bag with a stainless basket that can hold up to 20 pounds of grain. A heating element is run by an electric controller that allows for the maintenance of specific mash temperatures and makes mashing easier than ever. Each Unibrow is shipped with a counterflow chiller and the parts required to brew a batch of beer. We're really proud of the Unibrow, and we know you'll love it as much as we do. Go check it out at browsupply.com and sign up for our email list to receive special deals in your inbox.
Family-owned Atlantic Brew Supply is the largest homebrew shop in the Southeast. No gimmicks, no multinational corporate overlords, and no BS. They offer exclusive malts, yeast, and more from local artisans, as well as award-winning recipe kits. They also sell professional brewing gear and cask equipment from sister companies ABS Commercial and Cask Supply. Most ingredients are available by the ounce, plus Atlantic Brew Supply has an on-site calculator to help you craft your best brew. Orders are processed same day, and 2-day shipping is guaranteed for East Coast customers. Get 15% off your first order using promo code BREWPOD. That's BRUPOD at AtlanticBrewSupply.com. As every brewer knows, the best beer requires the best hops, which Yakima Valley Hops provides fresh from the source to brewers around the world, carrying everything from classics like Cascade to modern favorites like Galaxy and Mosaic, as well as other ingredients and gear. Yakima Valley Hops has it all. And don't forget to check out their new podcast, The Late Edition, where the YVH crew goes into depth on our favorite plant with industry experts. Head over to YakimaValleyHops.com now to see all they have to offer and subscribe to The Late Edition wherever it is you listen to podcasts. After a long brew day, the last thing I want to do is waste more time chilling wort. I've tried so many different options, and ultimately I settled on the super efficient immersion chillers made by Jaded Brewing. With the King Cobra and Hydra, I'm able to chill my entire batch of wort from boiling to just a few degrees above groundwater temperature in as little as 6 minutes. If an immersion chiller is right for your brewery, then do yourself a favor and check out all of the rad options Jaded Brewing has to offer at jadedbrewing.com, and be sure to let them know Brewlosophy sent you. Boiled cabbage, cooked corn, canned vegetables, none of these are flavors I want in my beer. I don't think anybody else does either. And yet it seems tasters and judges quite commonly perceive such characteristics. Indeed, DMS is a compound brewers work very hard to avoid. Malcolm, what exactly is DMS?
Dimethyl sulfide. Next question.
Next question, please. Yeah.
By the way, I'm dubbing this episode "Corn on the Pod." So we're going with bad puns today. We're rocking dad jokes.
Seriously are a nerd.
So DMS, dimethyl sulfide, is an organic sulfur compound, and as such, it tastes a lot like a lot of these vegetables that have a sulfur component. So think of, like you said, cabbage, broccoli, cauliflower, right? And there's actually a lot of other flavors that are present in beer and even wine that are often confused for DMS. But we'll talk about DMS in particular because it's brought up in judging and judge training and in the BJCP. You can go to the glossary. Great little write-up there, paragraph or two about what DMS is and what it's not, and what they mean when they talk about it in the guidelines, right? So often, if you're being trained as a judge, you're told to look for sweet corn, right? So for example, the BJCP guidelines, if it says DMS character is allowed or acceptable, they mean small amounts. They mean like this little flick of a nuance of a character attribute that reminds you of perhaps sweet corn, feed corn, or candy corn, little bit.
So the thing that gets me though, okay, so I'm going to be bouncing around a little bit because DMS is a very fascinating one to me. For starters, somehow it became one of the more commonly noted off flavors in beer evaluation. At least that's been my experience. You go to any homebrew club meeting or any beer meetup, and it's either diacetyl or DMS, and like the first person to say it is the cool person. Like they got it, and then it like biases everyone else's palates to think that they're picking it up. When I eat malted, Pilsner malt or pale two-row, just snacking on it when on a brew day or something like that, to me, I get a sweet, grainy thing that I can't help but wonder if people aren't kind of mixing that up or maybe misperceiving that for DMS.
Well, yeah. So there's another chemical that they use for training and for flavor houses, and that is also considered to have an overlap. So people call it 2-ATP, which I'm going to mispronounce this one, 2-acetylpyridine, and it has corn chips flavor, and it's also common in Maillard reactions with grains. So if you have just open up a bag of Frito-Lay, with those corn chips. I think they're called Frito-Lays, right? Those corn chips.
Yeah, whatever they are, they're delicious. I know Fritos. Man.
Yeah, Fritos. So those are the craftier, your mom and pop shop chips of the same ilk, those corn chips.
Yeah.
That is 2AP, are said to be such. And it's nice. It's actually kind of tastes like toasted bread and malted barley as it's kilned. Really nice smell. And then there's also these other flavor overlaps. Like if you go to, say, like a flavor compound training website like Araxa is a really nice website because you can go and under their tablets they have confusions. So you look under dimethyl sulfide, it will say sometimes it's confused with, and it will say like a methyl thiol acetate, ethane thiol, and dimethyl trisulfide. So thiol compounds are a sulfur-based compound, and there's going to be overlap there. And if you go look those up, right? So it's like a wormhole. You go look those up, you're going to start looking at cooked onions, fetid meat, Limburger cheese.
Gross.
A lot of these things of rot and decay have these aromas, and that's because another part of DMS is like a DMSO. So DMSO is dimethyl sulfoxide, I think. I might have got that wrong, but anyways, that is also in malt, and then bacteria and also yeast, but bacteria at a faster rate and a higher degree will convert DMSO to DMS, but that's happening in like in sauerkraut, or if you're doing sourdough. So yeah, so you have Enterobacter in a lot of cultures and various other bacteria, and they are converting DMSO into DMS, right? So like, yeah, you're right. A lot of these compounds are considered DMS, but there's so many other things that it could also be.
Well, and I don't mean to be terribly cynical here, but I guess I'm going to be a little bit. I just feel like this is one of those off flavors that is, you got all these other compounds that can end up in beer that maybe that DMS is getting mistaken for. But I'm of the belief that DMS sometimes gets called out when it's just not there because people maybe aren't familiar with a low hopped Pilsner style beer and are so used to drinking, hoppy IPA that when they're evaluating a beer that just has clean malt character, the first thing that comes to mind isn't, this is a really good, nice, dry, crisp, bready malt. It's, there's got to be DMS because I don't taste hops. You know what I'm saying? Like I guess that's the line of thought.
So there's some training infused bias there where if you're told, if you have a light Pilsner, that sweet corn thing is DMS, then that's what you call out.
Right.
But we know through analysis and study that those beers do tend to have more perceived DMS, because actual ales can have the same levels, but because, using this analogy again, whispering in a church versus whispering in a concert.
Yeah.
If you have other stuff going on in an ale, you're less apt to call out the flavor of DMS, right? Because there's all this other background noise. And I think in the beginning of the segment, I said 35 ppm. It's 35 ppb is about where the threshold is.
That's that's what I've heard. 35 to 40 ppb parts per billion. Yeah.
But a lot of commercial beers can be anywhere from 20 to 200, right? Now, if you have 200 in an ale with a lot of hops and a lot of other things going on, 200 ppb, you may not call out that 35, 40, whatever it is, of DMS. So here you are, trained as a judge. You're told if you hit sweet corn, you say DMS. So that might be an oversimplification or simplification of what we teach judges, but I think it gets the point across, right? Oh, this has a light corn flavor. Now, is it from? We'll talk about production and ways to eliminate it, but is it from boil or covering the pot, etc.? That's where it's debatable. But language is had, right? Communication is made. I said DMS. As a judge, I know what I meant to say, and now as a new participant, a contestant, I can go look at that information. You don't call the judge an idiot for mistaking. You know what he or she meant. He or she picked up what they perceived as sweet corn.
Yeah, I guess. Okay. Well, let's spend a little bit of time talking about kind of from the beginning, what where does DMS start? We hear a lot about like it being more of an issue with lower kilned like Pilsner style malts.
Yeah. So malts, have an amino acid called S-methylmethionine. We call it SMM, and it's in the malt, and then that gets, diffused or solubilized into the wort, and then S-methylmethionine undergoes a thermo decomposition. It breaks down into DMS, so dimethyl sulfide.
And that's a function of heat, right?
It's a heat, thermo degradation or thermal breakdown, if you want, thermal conversion for simplicity, of SMM to DMS. So in the SMM is pulled into the wort, and then once it gets about 175, 176 or ADC, it starts to break down, more rapidly. And then that is in your beer. So that is, we can smell it, because it's in that a beer. So as soon as it volatilizes, we smell it as this sweet corn.
Yeah, sweet corn. I've heard it described by some people. My wife loves to make, and I enjoy eating broccoli, but she has this cool little microwavable steam basket thing that we use for our broccoli, and I can always tell when it's broccoli night because the entire house has this very earthy, sulfury smell, if you will. And
when you're talking in the judging world, when we say DMS in light lagers, we mean pleasant corn. If you're talking DMS cabbage and broccoli, that's more vegetative. I mean, obviously corn's a vegetable, but when we're talking like beans or tomato soup, DMS, those are usually not desired, right? You don't want your delicate, nice Pilsner to taste like broccoli.
No way in hell.
So usually we consider that to be like infection-based or a flaw. So sweet corn DMS, yummy. Broccoli, cabbage in your beer, not so delicious.
Well, is that, I was going to use that as an analogy, but is that dimethyl sulfide? Is that the same conversion basically of SMM or some other compound that's being, like organic compound being converted into, it's obviously sulfur based, what I'm smelling with broccoli.
Yeah. So it's either a thiol, it's probably a hodgepodge of thiol and sulfur. Well, they're all sulfur, organosulfur compounds. And like a lot of these things, in a small amount with other complementary flavors, it presents as this. So a small amount of DMS might be sweet, nice corn, right?
Yeah.
A high amount, perhaps you're discovering this DMSO to DMS compound from bacteria.
Right.
Well, the bacteria is also kicking off other smells, like we talked about with Alroxa, the often confused with. So maybe it's ethane thiol and methane thiol, which can be more oniony and cabbagey. So
that's interesting.
If those are in there too, then we say DMS because we're trained to simplistically say sulfur-based vegetal DMS. And it might be DMS, but it's DMS with its other stuff, and that's why it smells differently and maybe offensive versus pleasant. So
or complementary, yeah.
It's complementary smells that are combined with it. And the intensity. Yeah. Just like ethyl acetate. Ethyl acetate, small little bit, juicy fruit gum. High amounts, acetone.
Right.
Nail polish remover.
Yeah, yeah. In moderation. Well, the analogy that I was going to make is that if you take, a bushel of broccoli and you smell it, out of the fridge or whatever, it just smells like broccoli. As soon as you add that heat and some steam, all of a sudden you've got these crazy, sometimes, for a minute at least, unpleasant smells that come off of it. It's sort of the same thing it sounds like with malt. And my understanding is that the conversion of SMM to DMS occurs basically as soon as you mash in.
No, you pull the SMM into the wort. You might have some slow, because it is a thermal breakdown, so probably the rate increases at 176 ADC, but really what the big thing that's going on in the mash is you're pulling the SMM into the wort, and then when you start to boil, once you get above 175 Fahrenheit or ADC, that's when you're converting SMM to DMS.
I see. And then what's interesting about that is that the argument then is so during the boil you're not only doing the conversion of SMM to DMS, but it's that very boil that also ends up driving the DMS off.
Yeah, so then now you're moving away from 80C and you're going up towards 100C, obviously 176 to 212 to boil. Now you're volatilizing. So now you're removing DMS. So you have DMS production that goes in and DMS elimination that goes out. So now you're volatilizing and driving DMS. It's a volatile chemical into the air and out of your beer, into the the ether, I should say. So now
into the nostrils and eyeballs of all the onlookers.
As we know from sensory, people, if you're smelling it, it's going away, right? It's coming from this object to you, so it's a gas. Now, we know that the half-life, the rate at which we reduce DMS, is about the rate at which we reduce DMS concentration by half is about 35 minutes, we'll say, at a standard pH. So I think it's a pH of like 5.4.
Right.
So at 5.4, at 212, we reduce half of our DMS every 35 minutes. So that's what half-life is. And interestingly enough, like I said in the beginning, pH has influence on almost all these reactions. As pH goes up, our half-life goes down. So you just increase your pH by 1 or 2/10 and you reduce your half-life by several minutes. But we tend to mash mash pH is a compromise of all sorts of things. So if we're at 52 or 5.2 pH, then our half-life's about 38 minutes, 37.5 minutes. So, pH influences these reactions.
That's interesting. And so what I guess what you're saying then is that's going, depending on the pH of your wort in the kettle, then that's going to determine, I guess, how long you need to boil to ensure that you've driven off all of the DMS.
But we don't tend to do it all, because otherwise we just do simple math and say, well, if it's 35 minutes at 5.4 per half-life, and most scientists say 3 to 5 half-lives means gone. So, but we're not, most people aren't boiling for 90 minutes to 120 minutes. We just don't do that.
Some people do.
So it's a compromise, But we also know that, there's an enzyme that breaks SMM down to DMS. So you're creating some more there. We also know that DMS can be produced through various other sources, bacteria, et cetera.
Sure.
So, but basically, we call 60 minutes good, because we'll say by that time it's below detectable.
Yeah, you're going. So my question then, thinking about the fact that SMM conversion to DMS is a function of heat, and then it ends up getting, you have to drive that DMS off. What is the reason for the contention? And I guess it's true. I mean, there's scientific stuff out there to back this up. But why is Pilsner malt? Why do we say that has to be? If you're making a highly Pilsner malt wort, that you need to boil that, make sure to boil that for 90 minutes, or what is it about the kilning process of like Pale Two-Row that makes it less susceptible to imparting DMS in beer?
So the more intensely it's killed, so the higher temperature and the longer it's killed, you're converting SMM to DMS.
So that does occur within the grain itself.
Yeah. So once you're above 70C, SMM is at least partially broken down to DMS. So the higher and the longer you kiln, the less potential you have for SMM in that malt.
Right.
So you have less of a potential to put DMS precursor into your wort.
So then, as it stands, then we would say maybe on a continuum, you've got Pilsner malt down at one end that's ostensibly going to have the highest amounts of DMS potential, and then you've got your pale malts, maybe Maris Otter, Vienna, and then all the way up to like Munich and your dark Munichs, which are probably going to have very little, if any, at that point, right?
Right. Yeah, and then further, add to that the fact that you might have, say you're a Lodo brewer, low oxygen person, you might have a less vigorous boil, so you're driving off less. And then say you're a traditional lager brewer and you're brewing low and slow, so you're low temperature, you have a less vigorous fermentation, so you're driving off less out of the fermentation vessel, because yeast has an enzyme that converts SMM to DMS as well, and then it drives it off through the process of the off-gassing during fermentation.
Yeah.
So all those things combine to give traditional lagers a higher potential to have residual DMS character in the beer.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Well, let's before we cut to break, let's talk about some methods that are kind of viewed, like home brewing methods that are used by folks that we tend to view as leading to higher levels of DMS. And I'm going to start. The first one that we hear about a lot, we've done shows on this in the past, is not boiling long enough, right? And not giving that wort enough time to drive off the DMS that's converted.
So if you don't boil long enough, you've potentially not had as many half-lives, right? So we talked about SMM reducing half of its amount per every 35 minutes, yada, yada, yada.
Right.
So the longer you boil, the higher chance you have of eliminating SMM and thus DMS in your resultant beer. So theoretically, if you boil or don't boil at all or do a short boil, you have the potential for more DMS in your beer.
Purely as a function of the fact that you're not allowing enough time for that DMS to be off-gassed during the boil for the conversion and eventual volatilization of DMS, right?
Yeah, it's a double two-pronged approach. One, you're getting rid of the precursor, which can later be converted to DMS by yeast.
Right.
But you're also getting rid of DMS. So the actual DMS in your beer is eliminated.
Right.
But also, because you are, by function of the boil, converting SMM to DMS, you have less of the precursor as well.
Yeah, and this is why when the common recommendation when you're using a high percentage of Pilsner malt is to boil for 90 minutes instead of 60, because you're really trying to do everything you can to just ensure that DMS isn't present. Another issue that I hear come up every once in a while, and that we just did a show on this a couple weeks ago, is boil vigor. Having a weak boil, not being able to get that wort really rolling in the kettle.
Yeah, absolutely. As you boil vigorously, you have a higher rate of gas exchange. So you should be churning the surface area over more often per unit time. So you have a higher chance of conversion of the gas. So it's kind of neat. There's also a study that showed if you use anti-foam, that because you reduce the surface area. I mean, they didn't really tackle why, but one of the thoughts is maybe because you reduce surface area, you have less volatilization of DMS as well. So boil vigor and surface area from foam, because using anti-foam resulted in a higher amount of DMS in the resultant beer.
That's really interesting. So you're talking about like firm cap or whatever.
Any version of that, yeah.
I've never heard that. Super curious to me because I use firm cap all the time. I haven't noticed any DMS in my beers, but I've heard other things. We should do a show on firm cap actually, because that's an interesting compound. It's my understanding. It's basically just gas X.
Yeah, I want to walk something back there. I said you're converting SMM to DMS during fermentation. It's actually DMSO. But basically the same idea though. If you boil longer, you don't want that other precursor,
right,
DMSO, to be converted to DMS during fermentation via yeast.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah, no, good. Well, I think outside of contamination, perhaps one of the biggest no-nos when it comes to brewing in terms of whole DMS thing is don't boil your wort with the lid on. Damn it.
Well, that's the same idea, right? So by keeping the lid on, that's almost the same as boiling with less vigor, because it doesn't off-gas and go into the atmosphere. You've increased your vapor space cover pressure slightly, so you're off-gassing less. And the double whammy is when that steam now condenses on your, say, lid, then it drips right back into the beer.
Right back into the wort. Yep.
Yeah.
And the argument there is that is exactly what you want to drive off, that has all of that compound in there that you want to ensure doesn't get into your wort. So by boiling with your lid on, you're condensing all of that nice steam that would usually go out, into the atmosphere, and it's getting dripped right back into your wort, which
a lot of professional breweries have like a little lip where if you have your boil vent stack, so anything that drips back goes into this little lip drain, and there's like a little pipe that comes down the side of the boil kettle.
Yeah.
And drains off onto the floor. And if you go over to that and smell it or taste it, it tastes like feed corn, like what you would use to bait deer or give to livestock. I mean, it tastes just like that.
It's basically just like distilled wort.
Yeah, it's distilled DMS, and whatever. A lot of other volatiles as well that you're driving off, by the way.
Yeah.
There's a lot of components that smell like green, almost like soybeans and green beans. It has like this green taste. It's hard to describe other than green vegetable.
Yeah.
But yeah, you go taste that condensate, and it's super concentrated DMS and vegetables.
That doesn't sound good. Yeah. Well, any other ways that you can think of that DMS is generally produced?
Well, we mentioned DMSO loosely. Basically, the dimethyl sulfoxide, the second precursor, yeast has an enzyme that converts it to DMS, but also bacteria have the ability to create DMS from DMSO.
Yeah.
And that's also why if you're doing flavor training, sometimes they'll have DMS mixed in with other compounds because they're trying to make you think infection or dirty lines or potential for any of these bacterias in your lines or in your beer.
Yeah.
So that's another method of formation.
I would say personally that when when I feel like I've really nailed DMS in a beer that I'm drinking, it's usually a beer that I feel like has other indicators of contamination as well. Like that to me really is the main way I think that what I believe to be actual DMS gets into beers. Well, from a conventional perspective, Malcolm, walk us through very, very quickly the steps one must take that is going to absolutely reduce their risk of getting DMS in their beer, starting with the mash.
Absolutely, 100% guaranteed, no DMS on your money back. Higher kilned malts, so potentially less SMM.
Yep.
You're bringing into your wort. A full volume, full vigor boil, so a vigorous boil, and lid off. Good, you want good vapor exchange. Then you want a rapid cooling from boil to less than that SMM DMS conversion temperature. So you want to get down cold quickly. And these are all considered generally good practices anyways, right?
Sure.
And then a clean fermentation, because you don't want to introduce bacteria that could convert SMM to DMS in your beer. Also, what are some other ones?
I think the clean fermentation one is, obviously, make sure that you're pitching healthy yeast. Again, I feel like healthy underpitched yeast, while it may produce a fine beer most of the time, you're still creating a vector for contamination if that yeast isn't rip-roaring ready to go when it hits the wort. So,
so vigorous fermentation too. So
yeah, exactly.
Along with what you just said, a vigorous fermentation has a better potential to eliminate DMS from your beer.
Yeah, well, and to drive off, the whatever is in the headspace, out through the airlock. So, well, those are the ways that the world of brewing understands how to reduce the risk of DMS. And we come back from this break, we're going to be talking about some results from some really interesting experiments that we've done where we have intentionally tried to get DMS in beer. Stick with us. Shopping for brewing supplies online can be a real hassle, which is why we recommend Love to Brew. They've got great prices, super fast shipping, and they carry exclusive products like East Coast Yeast, the Brewers Essentials brand, and their award-winning beer recipe kits. They're also the only place you can pick up your very own Brewlosophy recipe kit. The numbers don't lie. Love to Brew has hundreds of 5-star reviews, and thousands of brewers are choosing them for their supplies and ingredients each year. Experience the difference at lovetobrew.com. That's love, the number 2, brew.com. When dumping wort-soaked grain in leftover low-gravity wort while cleaning up after a brew day, did you ever wonder what your true efficiency would be if that wort made its way to the kettle instead? Using the brew bag, a fabric filter for all mash tuns and brewing methods, allows you to capture every last drop of wort. Not only does this increase kettle efficiency, it lowers your grain bill, which saves you money. Throwing wort in the trash is like dumping a 12-pack down the drain and just doesn't make sense. Use the brew bag and leave no wort behind. I've been using these filters for a long time and recommend them to everyone. I never have to worry about a stuck sparge and cleanup is fast and easy. Go grab yourself a brew bag fabric filter at brewinabag.com and be sure to use code TBP17 at checkout to get a discount on your order.
Compact and simple to use with a small footprint for brewing indoors, the Grainfather makes it easy for you to brew professional quality beers at home. The Grainfather is an all-in-one brewing system that lets you brew all grain beer in a single compact stainless steel unit. It uses an electric heating element and pump to maintain a constant temperature and to circulate the wort during the mashing and cooling stages. It also comes with a counterflow chiller to reduce chilling times and produce high quality wort. And now, with the addition of their conical fermenter, the Grainfather takes things one step further by offering homebrewers state-of-the-art temperature-controlled fermentation just like commercial breweries use. And with the Grainfather Recipe Creator and Connect app, you can easily design a recipe, sync your brewing system with your phone, and then just sit back and relax as the app takes over and assures that you maintain your scheduled mash temps and boil schedule. Head to Grainfather.com to purchase your all-in-one brewing system today and to sign up for their free recipe creator tool. Once more, head on over to Grainfather.com, that's Grainfather.com, and get started today.
Have you ever thought about adding a port to your kettle but held off because you didn't feel like drilling into your gear or sending it off to have someone else do it? From the makers of the super fast counterflow chiller, the exGEERitor, comes the Hangover, the easiest way to add extra ports to your kettle as well as countless other options. Mount a faucet to your keg for easy portable pouring. Set up the perfect whirlpool arm. Hold a heating element in place. All of this and so much more without permanently modifying your gear. Manufactured right here in the United States, the Hangover offers brewers too many convenient solutions to list here. So head over to exGEERitor.com today to see what the Hangover can do for you. Brewers and experienced beer drinkers seem to pride themselves a little bit on their tasting prowess, and especially their ability to identify off flavors. One of the more common off flavors being DMS. We're all guilty of it. Present company completely included. You know, someone serves me a beer at a club meeting, and rather than simply enjoying it, I immediately dig for a problem so that I can be the first one to point it out. Right? We've all been there. At the very least, we all know people who go there often. Well, over the last few years, I've become extremely skeptical of people's tasting abilities, especially their capacity to identify specific off flavors like DMS. We talked a little bit about it in the last segment. Part of it is that I think for a lot of people, their knowledge of off flavors is based almost entirely on hearsay or something they learned maybe from another brewer who has a little bit more experience than them. So kind of an appeal to authority. I don't know. What do you think about that, Malcolm? Do you think people are as good at identifying these off flavors as some seem to make? I don't mean to be a jerk here, but you know.
Well, you can't help that. That's your nature.
Yeah.
No, I think some people are. Yeah. So I am like to say or keen to say, on average, people are average. So
it's true.
I think, I mean, the math works. So I think that most people are pretty good at detecting this. We know the flavor threshold is 35 ppb for a reason. We've checked it. And the trick is to taste something or smell something that does have DMS, like a flavor spike, and then make a flavor memory. Because what I think DMS tastes like might not be what you... Like, I have no idea what the color purple looks like to you. I have no idea.
Oh, this is going to go deep, dude. If we go down this rabbit hole.
But hold on a second. So we give you this thing. We say this is DMS. We don't think it is. It is. This is a flavor spike.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Measured in a lab. Now you tell me what it tastes like. Or you tell yourself what it tastes like. Write it down. Take a note. That is now your flavor memory. That is your aroma sensory memory. Now go look for that in beer. That is DMS.
But isn't it possible though that the way that flavor presents itself in, say, a Czech Pilsner is different than the way it might present itself, even if it's above a perceptible threshold, the way that it presents itself in something like a red ale or
Absolutely. And I'm actually glad you said Czech Pilsner, because if you go do DMS check on the BJCP, Czech Pilsner actually won't have DMS listed, and my guess is that because Czech Pilsners are decocted, so a lot of volatilization there.
Sure.
But a lot of those light lagers say a DMS acceptable, small amounts, but Czech, not so much. Now, yes, because it's not mentioned in Czech, it would be an off flavor because it's not expected, right?
Sure.
Now, the way it presents could be different because of the complementary flavors. So how it interacts, it could not be purely corn, sweet corn. It might be something else, right? Because of, like you said. Now, that's just the way it is. So now you have to kind of suss that out. If you come to this corny vegetal character in a Czech lager, then I don't think it's out of bounds to perhaps even inaccurately say DMS. I think that communicates something.
Oh man, I don't. We'll have to agree to disagree on. I feel like people really. I think I've studied philosophy a lot. I've got a PhD in psychology. I'm not dropping that to sound more smart here or anything, but I really feel like there's this pride thing that comes with a lot of people when they're evaluating beer. They feel good about their abilities, and I'm more power to people who enjoy doing that. So I'm all good with that. But I feel like maybe that could get in the way of an actual objective evaluation. I'm skeptical of it. I'm not sitting here saying that it's impossible for people to taste these things. But at the very least, it was this skepticism that inspired the entire Off Flavor series, which Malcolm, you've ended up kind of taking over lately. But the first one that we did was focused on DMS, and I did it here in town. I was absolutely excited. This is the kind of stuff that just tickles my fancy. And basically what I did is I took a notably clean, lager beer, a Bitburger, and I added these flavor active capsules to 32 ounces of beer, put it in a Nalgene bottle. And I believe, I don't have the numbers in front of you, but I believe what I did is I dosed it to the point, this was a recommendation of Flavor Active, dosed it to the point to where it was 3 times the flavor threshold. So that's right around 100 ppb, if I'm not mistaken, Malcolm.
Yeah, so 35 times 3, yeah.
Something like that, yeah. But it was enough, according again to the manufacturer of these capsules, it was enough to be perceptible, and so that was the point. I wanted to see if people would in fact be able to identify a beer that was dosed with DMS, this very, very commonly, cited off flavor, from beers that weren't. When I was putting these beers together, and just to be clear, the non-dosed beers were also poured into a Nalgene, different Nalgene bottles, just because I wanted to make sure that there was as much consistency between these as possible. I wanted the only difference to be the DMS off flavor stuff. As I was making this DMS'd beer, the powder that came out of the capsule definitely had a smell to it that wasn't very pleasant to me. To me, I didn't get cooked corn. I've never tasted cooked corn in a beer, so I'm not sure where that descriptor came from. At least that's not how I perceive it. To me, it smelled like if you were to take ketchup and leave it out on the counter for a few days.
That's a very common descriptor too. Canned tomatoes and ketchup is very common as well.
Yeah. I've heard, like you mentioned earlier, tomato soup. That's another one that I've heard. I guess that would be more akin to what I perceived it as. So anyways, I made up, this solution with these capsules, and given the fact that I only had so much, I was only able to serve these to 11 participants. So I tried to make them count. 4 of the participants were certified BJCP judges. 3 of them are Cicerone certified beer servers. 1 of them was a professional brewer, and the rest were just craft beer, aficionados, people who really, enjoy craft beer and like evaluating craft beer. I think I also had Tim, the wonderful beer evaluator that he is, take this test as well, out of interest. Out of 11 people, in order for us to say that the results were significant, 7 would have had to be able to identify the DMS dosed beer. And in the end, only 3 were able to, not even a full third. This, as you might imagine, not only kind of made me chuckle on the inside, but really surprised me. And I think the main reason it surprised me was I could easily identify the odd beer out in every trial that was served to me.
So they just may not have been keen on it. So a lot of times, what I see with training is some people will get it wrong because they don't recognize it and they don't know how to look for it. And then after some training, they didn't become a better taster or a smeller. They became better at recognizing.
Sure.
So the analogy I'll use sometimes is, take some someone from a city, whatever, and say, hey, go point to an oak tree. You know, and then, you know, he or she is sitting there going, huh?
The
And
hell
then
are
you go
talking
show
about?
them, this is what the bark looked like, this is what the leaves look like. Now go find an oak tree, and they can do it.
Yeah,
Are they
yeah.
better at seeing? No. You told them what to look for.
Exactly. So they're and the argument there, and this is an argument we've talked about before, that some readers and listeners of Brulosophy stuff bring up, and it's that when people are aware of the variable, they're more capable of honing in on potential differences. And so I considered that with this, and we're sitting out in my garage. I'd collected the data, and when I revealed to the 11 participants that were out there just what the nature of this experiment was, you know, you can imagine the shock was palpable. These were very good beer evaluators, certified BJCP judges, who just could not distinguish a DMS beer from one that didn't have any DMS in it at all, or at least wasn't dosed with DMS. And so what we ended up doing is, with the little amount of beer that I had left over in these Nalgene bottles, I served them. This time, they were still blind to what beer was in, what color cup. But I told them the entire nature that I dosed a beer with DMS. You want to know how many of them were able to consistently pick out the DMS beer after they knew?
All of them.
None of them. Not a single one of them,
Jesus.
dude. And that was the part that really, really shocked me. Not only had they already tasted the beers, had I already told them which one had the DMS in it, when they knew the nature of the experiment, they still couldn't distinguish the DMS dosed beer from the ones that weren't dosed with DMS. I don't mean to be like, see, I'm right, but I feel like there's a element of, palate sensitivity, that some people are capable of detecting things at certain thresholds or certain levels, whereas other people may not be able to do that. And I guess that's where I struggle with how commonly DMS is noted on like BJCP score sheets.
Yeah, I don't know how often. I don't think DMS is on there a lot. At least not when I judge. I don't see it a lot, and I don't see it from my judging partners. I think people look for it in the light lagers, whatever, but I think they're using it to describe sweet corn, and that could be other malt components.
Sure.
But, for example, people who take the certified Cicerone exam, they have to, fed out X, I think it's 7, whatever it is, or 6 beers spiked with various components.
Right.
And you have to get a 70% to pass the flavor part, which means you can only get like, I don't know, someone do the math real quick, 1 or 2 wrong.
1 or 2 wrong,
but,
yeah.
So it's probably 2. But anyways, you get 2 wrong and you're done. But people pass that test quite a bit.
Yeah,
Are
a
they
lot,
always
yeah.
getting DMS wrong? No. People have different weaknesses, our strengths. So, they might not get diacetyl this time, and they might get DMS this time. I seem to struggle, for whatever reason, with the Aroxa's version of acetaldehyde. Now I know what acetaldehyde smells like to me in a beer. I've had other spikes, whatever, but after I get down to the 1 or 2 I can't get, I go to acetaldehyde in my brain and I go, is this the control, or does this one have that little tiny faint note of acetaldehyde, which
Sure. Yeah.
is like latex paint to me, for Aroxa's spike. So that's what I do. Now, I think people are, like I said, we have that, flavor threshold known for a reason, because on average, this is when people can smell it.
Sure.
And like the Aroxa tabs, I just looked it up. So they say flavor threshold 30 to 50 micrograms per liter, but their capsule is 150. So they went on the high side. So theirs isn't 90 to 105, which would be 35, times 3.
Yeah.
They went to 50 times 3, so 150.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Well, there are, like we discussed in the last segment, there are various methods that are I guess known to increase the risk of getting DMS in beer. We've tested a lot of these out, and we've already done shows on a bunch as well. So if you want to go back and listen to the shows on boil length, we've done a 30-minute versus a 90-minute boil with mostly Pilsner malt wort, and that came back non-significant. We've got all kinds of interesting stuff, but the one that we're going to talk about next is, to me, was one of those experiments that I've always kind of been hesitant to do because of not wanting to waste a full 5 gallons of beer. But it was a good one. Before we get to that, I need to remind everyone about our awesome sponsors, Imperial Yeast, who are providing brewers with the finest quality yeast on the market. Packing 200 billion cells into each pitch-right pouch, brewers are ensured a quick and healthy fermentation. With a wide range of ale and lager strains, as well as some funkier stuff, Imperial Yeast is sure to have what you need to turn your wort into delicious beer. I love these guys. I just pitched a pack of their G03 Dieter, which is their Kolsch strain. It was from May, and I'm thinking, okay, I got to pitch this into a starter and build it up. It had a nice Kreuzen on it within an hour. I mean, the stuff is amazing. Go check out everything Imperial Yeast has to offer at imperialyeast.com today. Okay, so this experiment had to do with the claim that you should never boil your wort with the lid on. As we talked about before, when you do that, the condensation builds up on the lid and drips back down into the wort, which means that all of that icky DMS you are just putting it right back in the wort. It doesn't have anywhere to escape. And obviously you're going to end up with a beer that you're going to want to dump because it tastes so bad. So for this one, what I did is I designed a fest beer recipe. I think that, seemed like a valid style to go with, only because it had a higher grist. A higher OG means I'm using more malt, and I went with 78% Pilsner malt, so low kilned, and made up the rest 12% Vienna malt. It was a single mash, so a no sparge. 15 gallons of wort into the kettle, and then what I did is I stirred that wort up and I split it between 2 kettles. So I homogenized the wort, made sure that the SG was consistent, and then I split it up between the 2 kettles. Both worts were boiled with the same exact vigor, and what I mean by that is that the flame underneath the kettles was identical. I can't say for sure what the boil looked like on the covered batch because it was covered. But one of the batches had the lid off, the other one had the lid on. If you go check out this article at brewlosophy.com, you'll see there's like a GIF, a video on there of what the covered lid boil looked like. There was actually a lot of steam escaping. It surprised me, but it has to go somewhere, So what I expected to see was that there would be more wort volume in the batch that had the lid on the kettle. And my thinking was, some of the the evaporation is going to drive off some of that liquid, but so much is getting trapped on the lid and dripping back down into the wort. I expected there to be maybe a half gallon or so more wort in the covered batch than in the uncovered batch. But that wasn't the case. Both batches at the end of the 60-minute boil had the same amount of wort in the kettle. In fact, it was, you look at the pictures on the article and it was identical.
Yeah, that's counterintuitive. Yeah. I'm not sure what happened there.
The other thing I expected to see, partially as a function of my expectation that there would be more wort volume in the covered batch, was a difference in OG. And so I would expect to see the covered batch have potentially like lower OG than the uncovered batch. That's sort of what we saw. The batch that had the lid off, it was boiled with the lid off, came back with 1060 OG, whereas the batch that had the lid on it came back at 1058. I mean,
that's weird though, because the volume difference without an OG difference or vice versa it's like, why is it higher?
I know.
It's whatever. It's
So what I wondered was, you know what? I can't explain it. It's obviously not that big of a difference, 1060 to 1058.
Yeah.
Nothing I'd concern myself with necessarily. I did think it was an interesting observation though, particularly given the fact that the post boil volume in each kettle was identical. I mean, they had the same amount of evaporation seemingly. Once the worts were chilled, I chilled them both very quickly, racked them into separate plastic carboys, and pitched slurry, Saflager W3470 slurry from a batch that I had kegged earlier that day. So they got identical amounts of yeast slurry. And in both of them, fermentation activity appeared around the same time. So I started to see airlock activity back about 6-7 hours later, and they fermented similarly. Interestingly, though, the Kreuzen on the batch that was boiled with the lid off was fluffier, kind of more what you'd expect, whereas the batch that was boiled with the lid on almost no Kreuzen development. If you can check out the pictures in the article. It's really a really interesting observation. I have no idea what would cause that.
Yeah.
All right. So then at the end of fermentation, I took hydrometer measurements and found the beers ended up pretty similar. The one boiled with the lid off came back at 1006 FG, whereas the one that had the lid on it came back at 1007. Pretty similar there. Slightly lower attenuation, maybe in the just given the starting gravities in the covered boiled batch, but nothing crazy there. So I served these beers to 20 participants. And of course, I started drinking them and kind of sampling them side by side prior to serving them to the participants. But out of those 20, 11 would have had to identify the unique sample in order for us to say that these findings were significant. But in the end, only 8 people were able to identify or guess the odd beer out. Again, this finding that just kind of got in the way of what I expected, of what I really thought was going to happen.
Yeah, that's the nature of maybe it did have more, but not enough to be above threshold. And you did do a fest beer, which is slightly more flavorful compared to some other light lager. So maybe it was, who knows? Maybe it was some amount higher, but not enough to matter threshold wise. So that could lead credence to the fact that while it could analytically be higher, is it perceptively higher? Which is one of my favorite things about these experiments is there could be a difference. The science could be sound, but it still might not matter.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and that was kind of the explanation that I came up with myself to kind of justify these findings as well. Is perhaps there was more DMS in there. That's one potential explanation that there was more DMS in the covered boil batch than there was in the open boil batch, but that it just wasn't still above. It was still below that flavor threshold for most people. I'll tell you this: that in conversations with the people who were able to identify the unique sample, none of them, not a single one, said that there was because of DMS or a difference in flavor in that. Right. Usually, I think the common go-to when somebody learns that they got it right is, one had a sharper bitterness than the other one. I mean, I hear that with every experiment,
Yeah. No, it had different mouthfeel. Yeah, I can get that. Yeah, absolutely, bro.
Right. Well, my personal experience with these beers, I mentioned that I started sampling them before collecting data. And in side-by-sides, my bias was just working overtime. I thought that I could detect a very, very slight kind of vegetable thing in the covered boil batch. I later learned that the person who was serving these to me had intentionally swapped the glasses to see if I would say that. And of course I did. So I was actually tasting, at one point at least, the batch that was boiled with no lid on it, saying that, assuming that it was the one that had the lid on it and all this. Of course, when I took the blind triangle tests myself, I did numerous attempts, and the beers tasted identical. I was unable to identify the odd beer out with any consistency.
That's something one of my friends would do.
From I love trash. It. Yeah.
They'd be like, "Yeah, so what do you think? Tell me more." They'd start baiting me into it. And well, let me tell you how you're full of shit.
Exactly. You're good friends when they want to call you out and make you feel like a fool.
Absolutely.
So, anyways, pretty interesting findings in that one. I guess the takeaway for me on that, I'm not going to start boiling with a lid on. I certainly don't think that doing so is gonna absolutely produce a bad beer. I know a lot of people who start their boil with a lid on because it allows them to reach that nice rolling, vigorous boil quicker, and then take it off, or that maybe they'll leave their lid halfway on. I really don't think at this point, at least based on these findings, that is, like I said, going to be the end all be all.
Well, think about this. Like the average evaporation rate for a homebrew is nearly double, not quite double, of the average for commercial. Like most commercials, places are anywhere from like 3 to 8% evaporation rate, boil volume loss. It's going to depend on a lot of things, and there's even some that are almost completely covered, and they're like around 2 or 3%. But a lot of homebrewers experience like 8 to 12 up to 15% evaporation rate.
Yeah.
So even if you take your homebrew and cover the lid like half, and now you're at like 7.5 versus 15% evaporation rate.
Right.
You're still more vigorously boiling than most are evaporating, I should say, but than most commercial places.
Yeah.
Because a lot of them will have like those that they boil inside. They have that cone and they have a stack, and some of them will have a fan too to assist to pull it out. But they lose only like I said, 3.5 up to 8%.
Yeah.
Compared to ours. So.
Yeah. That's interesting. Well, like I mentioned before, we have done other experiments that we've talked about on the show and focused on, in previously. You can go check all of those out at brewlosophy.com. But Malcolm, any kind of ending thoughts when it comes to DMS in beer and the methods that you use when you're brewing?
I've tried to get DMS in beers. I have a hard time doing it. I know you can do it by, I think Scott Janish has a good write-up on. He did it with an IPA.
Yeah.
And he got like 170 ppb into his beer. He had it analyzed. So it can be done. I think a combination of the malts that we use today, and I know you are loath to hear this analogy, but good brewing practices. If you do good brewing practices, which is boil somewhat reasonably, chill somewhat rapidly, and have good healthy fermentation, I think you're probably going to be fine from the boogeyman that is DMS.
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree with you, you jerk. But
Jerk.
you mentioned something that I give a lot of credit to maltsters when it comes to avoiding DMS and the general lack, in my opinion, of DMS in beers today, I think has a lot to do with malting practices. I've talked to Seth Klon from Mecca Great Estate Malt about this, and yeah, they take, they make an effort to try to reduce that in their malt. I think it makes it a lot easier for us to avoid it, even if we don't use the absolute most pristine practices. We do a lot of these short and shoddy brews. We're going to start doing more shows on those batches. So we're not going to focus on any specifically here, but in every single one of them, we're boiling for 20 to 30 minutes. And I don't think yet that we've had one where people would, consistently identify DMS in those beers. So,
yeah, but now serve someone a cream ale sometimes. They almost always find it.
You mean the beer that's made with flaked corn?
What's that?
Oh, I got corn. Yeah.
Yeah. It's very common. Like you said, giving some credence to what you said earlier, which I actually argued against, is that yes, if you give someone a cream ale, they will almost always find cream or cream. Yeah, right. Corn flavor.
Corn flavor. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, if you're brewing and you think you're getting DMS in your beer, maybe it's not. And if it is, heed some advice that we talked about in this show, and hopefully you can avoid it. If you want to read any more of the experiments that we've done, you can head over to brewlosophy.com to do that. The Brewlosophy podcast is made possible by the generous support of our sponsors, as well as all of our rad listeners. We seriously could not do this without you. Cheers to everyone who has subscribed and left a review of our show. It makes a huge difference. If you haven't yet, please consider doing so. Head over to brewlosophy.com/support to view a list of ways you can easily help us to continue producing this podcast. If you want a reward for your support, visit patreon.com/brewlosophy. Thanks again for listening. We'll be back next week with another episode of the Brewlosophy podcast. Until then, think beer.
Start off the morning with some hot tea, lemon and honey, cause it suits my bro. Put some herb in the bowl, yeah, it's homegrown. Ain't gotta go through the middleman no more.